very much myself that will be in view. So, okay, so make yourself comfortable. Happy New Year with a tiger, by the way. Chinese New Year starts today. I think probably need that a little bit more. It's better. Rubbing your hands together. And then just tapping over your face. Over your head and neck. One shoulder and your arm. The other side. Up your chest. Belly. And your legs. Sitting back, just letting yourself drop right back into the chair as much as you can. You'll find there's a little bit of weight in your heels, but most of your weight dropping back through sort of like somewhere in your back, where depending on the height of the chair. And lower back, hips, buttocks, that kind of area. And from there, sort of releasing, draining away quality. And take care. I've had a number of people come up to me in the last week or so saying, oh, I'm a bit kind of pulled a muscle in my back, or my shoulder's a bit stiff or something like that. This time of year, when it's a bit chilly, and maybe a bit chilly at night, and you get out of bed and maybe pull something, it's very easy just to pick up these odd little twists and strains. To go gently, go respectfully with them. Remember, what we're trying to do is just to kind of ease them rather than strain against them. There's always a temptation when somebody's into, how far can I push it? We're trying not to. Think of this sort of quality, this massaging, flowing quality that we try and generate in Tai Chi. Get that working for you. So as you sit back, maybe just focusing on your breathing, just get that sense of the rhythm of your breath. Don't worry, so if you can comfortably get the deeper breathing as though your lungs were down in your belly, then certainly you can do that. But more important than that at the moment, following up on this idea that we move within the space that's available, just see, even if it's quite shallow, see how much you can breathe. Don't try and slow the breathing down, but just try and let it settle into a smooth rhythm. And you may find that, if you can let go a little bit in your chest and your shoulders, you may be able to deepen the breath, but more the quality of the breath that I want you to focus on at the moment. And then bring it in. Remember that if you are a bit stiff in your back or something like that, that the exercises that are likely to work best in those areas are also the areas that the exercises that generally work in those areas. So if you think, well, this one is good for the shoulder, possibly is, but if you overdo it, then it will strain the shoulder. Remember also that in terms of the overall effect, if we can get the energy flowing through the body, that will also have an effect. You don't necessarily have to work on that part of the body. You might do, it's a fair enough thing to do, but just look at generating that flow through the whole of your body. So just turning your head This opening set of the classes where we go through the different joints is a very useful way of just appraising yourself. You know, if you start to turn your head, is it a bit stiff in my neck? Just make it a smaller movement. But as we go through the different parts of the body, you will gradually develop a sort of sense for what's going on there. This this idea of building up a picture of the inner landscape of the body. And then the shoulders. And going forwards. Down to your sides. Winding. Remember, we're looking for the sort of echoes of the movement, the resonance of the movement elsewhere in the body. This one, very much as the shoulder rotates, you feel that opening across your chest. And then as the hands rotate back, you feel the same kind of thing across the upper back. So if, say, for instance, you do have that stiffness in the shoulders, actually, don't concentrate on the shoulders, just think about what's happening in your chest. Maybe even artificially sort of puff your chest out a bit, pull it back, puff out, pull back a couple of times just to reinforce those connections. So you, rather than trying to move your shoulders or whatever, you feel as though they're being moved for you. And again, that's an idea that you can develop through all of the movements. And then winding around. And back the other way. And easing forwards and push it back. See if you can remember some of those qualities of movement, you know, the spine floating forwards and backwards, excuse me, that rhythmic fluid quality working through your body. You'll be able to recapture some of that simply through recognizing that recollection, that memory, the image it gives you. When you go forwards, look for that nice flowing quality through your knees. You may find even in the chair that you just habitually stiffen in your legs and knees. Try and reverse that and get a sense of your legs almost like a balloon, filling up with the weight, and then emptying as you go back, and the reverse of that in the hips and lower back, filling up and then emptying. And eventually with both of those, filling up to such a point that, this is particularly true for the feet, there's then a movement downward. Just like if you put a sponge under a tap and let the water drip into it, eventually the water will start to drain out of the bottom of the sponge. But the image of the sponge might be a useful one to you. Something that we want to try and reproduce, of course, standing. Turn a little bit. And then in the other direction. And then going around. So once you've started to record this quality of movement, assuming you're able to, it then becomes an indication of how you're doing, really. If it's not there, then we start to think about the structure and how we're moving. But this one, for instance, the work, if you like to think of it like that, is being done in hips and waist, feet and legs. So now the shoulders, upper back, neck, all just being gently moved. As long as you're not moving too far, that's one of those kind of resonances. If you were a bit stiff, if you are a bit stiff in your upper back, this can help to just ease that stiffness. Go back the other way. One of the terms that we sometimes use in Chinese medicine for those areas, and particularly if they're a bit painful, is that they're knotted. They're knotted up. And if you've got a shoelace that's knotted up, you don't just kind of like pull and wrench at it because it's not going to help. You sort of very gently unpick it. Come back to the center. Pull one heel up, step forwards, pull back. So eventually that awareness of, or the image of, if you prefer, the quality of movement that we're looking for becomes a principal guide on the other side. And either we feel it or we don't. If we don't feel it, that's when we need to start thinking about posture, how we're doing the movement, are we working in the right way, so on and so forth. And just come back to sitting. Now, before we go any further, I'm just going to show you something. I'm going to turn the chair around just to think about this posture in a little bit more detail. I'm going to grab this pole. So, if I'm sitting here, so if I put the pole by my hips, well, I can't put more forward in the chair. I've talked about the center line of the body as an image, and this is it. Now, to get into a good posture, as far as I can, and keep the pole there, that's about where I would want to be. So you can see, if I was standing, I would be like this, and the pole would be coming out the crown of my head. But because I'm seated and I want to distribute the weight forwards a little bit more, then I'm at a slight angle. But try and have this image of the pole, and imagine that, say that, you know, almost like there's a piece of elastic from the back of your head attached to the pole, which works in the same way as a rope that ties a boat to a mooring does. So that when you come forwards, you're still aware of that in the back of your mind, and then you come back to it, and then you go forwards again, and you come back. If you've got something on the wall next to you, you might be able to line yourself up to that. So let me turn the chair around. I'm not suggesting for a moment that that pole exists within your body, or indeed that there are any straight lines in your body. I've said before, these ideas are a bit like the grid lines on a map. They don't exist in any kind of concrete reality, but they're useful images. So the only time we would go beyond that, go behind that pole potentially, would be if we were doing scooping the sea, in which case when I go back, I wouldn't want to go back too far, but the pole would be about here, and I've got this line up through the body like that. So how far back would depend on how your back is. There it's uncomfortable. There I'm fine. I've still got the alignment in the body, but I wouldn't do this. I mean, if I pull my foot in, then suddenly I've lost the counterbalance to the movement. So give yourself a couple of moments in the seated posture just to feel that line and how your body is sort of gathered around it. And then let your hands drop down and trying to maintain that as we go through the different exercises. This is quite tricky. As soon as we start to move, things can get displaced. And in addition, a lot of our attention now is on what we're doing with that particular exercise. So all of these ideas that I talked about initially, we want to become habitual ways. But when the quality of movement changes, it's an indication that, oh, kind of something's gone out of line. Maybe, and this happens quite often actually, so, oh, this is nice. And then without even registering it, you do something like this. And then you think, oh, it feels a bit stiff. And, oh, my feet have gone out. Or maybe you've just gone a bit too far or something like that. So when you lose that fluidity of movement, that's when you start to sort of actively go back to those basic postures, basic ideas. And then change into fisherman castanet. Mostly what we do in these exercises is we take a posture that gives us the maximum chance of moving towards those fundamental principles, however we understand them. This isn't necessarily how we would sit or move around or anything like that, but there are ways of developing them. They're kind of laboratory, I suppose you could say. And if you can develop these movements in the laboratory or in the classroom, if you prefer the image, then you've got more chance of being able to adapt those lessons to the daily life. So now, rolling the ball in. There's a great variety of exercises. Sometimes the arms are hanging down all the time. Sometimes they're drawn up. Sometimes it's one arm and the other, so on and so forth. There's a whole range of movements here. If you're finding that about here, your shoulders are stiffening up, two things to check. One is that you've got that feeling of your hips hanging back, pulling you up, counterbalancing the angling forward. So should be no need in theory for your upper back to strain. The other is check whether you're actually straining to lift your arms. Again, from the side here, thing to think about at this point is the angle here between your body and your arm. Don't change, don't change that angle. Just push back with the legs, and your arm will come up, and then the elbow drops. So this would be the movement. What I'm not doing is this, trying to lift the arm. It's coming over nice and smoothly. Hence the image of the ball. If there were a ball in front of you and you push yourself back, you can let your hand slide over the ball. And if you end up getting less movement, you will get some of that movement back, but you might also have been moving too far beforehand. So again, you know, if you've got that stiffness in your shoulders or anywhere in your back, really, or maybe in your arms, you can start to think, well, how am I doing the movement? What do I need to do to improve it? Not that we're not using the arms, and we know when we go into pigeon spreads its wings, we're keeping the arms in position. But notice that my elbows are hanging down. So I'm not sort of like this, hopefully. And again, this exercise really demonstrates the value of that opening and closing in chest and upper back. And I think I probably mentioned before, but you know, it can be a good one just to think about your breathing in if you wish to do that. The way to do that would be just to feel how it is to take an in-breath as you come back. Not every time. Just give yourself, your body time to breathe out. And after a couple of rounds, maybe do it again. Feel that expansion upwards in the front of your body is part of the breathing. Good, and then pushing away. So everything is aimed at working with the natural patterns of movement that are there within your body at any one time. Much as if you're chopping wood, you wouldn't chop against the grain, across the grain, you'll chop with the grain, because it's just that much more efficient. And sometimes we direct the movement, but quite a lot of the time, we simply allow the movement to find those pathways. Make sure that the environment that we're moving in, the inner landscape, is a conducive one. And just think, oh, there's a movement down there or something like that. Won't necessarily be the same every time you do the exercise. Good, and then hands fisted. And then back to pigeon spreads its wings and just a little sequence. Pigeon spreads its wings. And then pushing a wave. And punch with both fists. So going back to those sort of like pathways, you'll find after a while, some of them are fairly consistent, but it will depend on where and if there is tightness and holding in your body. But nevertheless, Each exercise has its own sort of characteristic echoes and characteristic pathways working through your body. Just recognize that as much as you can. One more round. And then changing. And polishing the table. So it's quite good just to spend a long time on any one exercise, but it's also good to have the variety, because those patterns within our inner landscape will change from exercise to exercise. One more in each direction. And then change into the vertical movements, looking for those same connections, qualities within the body, or say the same connections of each individual, but the same broad connection, the feet, the hips, the shoulders, and so on. Maybe feeling with this one a little sort of almost, well, for me it's a little sort of tingling feeling going up my spine. You might feel it's slightly different, almost like somebody's just running their finger up and down my spine. Just imagine your fingertips either side of your spine as they go up and down, gently massaging your own spine. Not that you could, but not a bad image, because one of the things we want to try and do is get a sense for the depth of the body. We're naturally front-facing creatures, but it's good to open up and broaden out that picture a little bit. And then, so even here, you know, as your hands go up, your hips at the back of the body are sinking down. We have the movement in your back. We're really looking for that sense of the whole body in movement, with all that implies for the connections and the energy, and the way that we move. Then our awareness has to develop into an all-round awareness, not a fragmented one. So being aware of the body helps that development of our attention, which again feeds back into the body. At the same time, helps us with this calmer, quieter quality that we're trying to develop. And then parting the clouds, a more gathered quality. Like you're tidying up your mind a little bit, just putting away the things you don't need at the moment that have been left out. Came across a book once on meditation with the wonderful title of Breath Sweeps Mind. Breath Sweeps Mind. I don't know what the book was like. I didn't buy it. Well, I thought it was a great title. And this idea of not just the breath, but in the case of Tai Chi, the movement, kind of sweeping mind and body, clearing mind and body, is an interesting one. And change into dragon plucks the stars from the sky. It's more difficult to maintain that smooth sense of your whole body moving as one unit, with the movements going straight up and down. When the weight is moving forwards and backwards, there's an obvious connection there. But here it's very easy to slip into an upper body consciousness. And not only that, an upper body and a forwards facing consciousness. The feeling that we're looking for, and I don't want you to do this, but I'll do it next time. It's almost as though as you push down through your feet and your hips, that you're going to do this, that you sit up and then come down, and then do it on the other side. So, as I say, I'm not suggesting you do that. It's quite a strong exercise. So if you do want to have a go, feel free, but be careful. But that sense of a movement up and down through your body is really what you want to be feeling. It's quite difficult to do that in the sit to stand mode. I've tried it myself, but because standing up is always just requires that little bit more effort. So to stand up smoothly is actually quite difficult. And when I tried it on my own, I found myself sort of stumbling forwards just a little bit. So if you do try it, do be careful. One more on each side. And then pushing up. Do you still have that smoothness of movement? If not, as you bring your hands back here, just let the hands drop down, let your elbows drop down, feel the weight of your arms, rather than just rolling into the next movement. A slight, fairly noticeable pause as you just rest again, push out. Because although your elbows are bent, the hands are still hanging from your shoulders, just there happens to be a bend in the arm. Now this time, as you push out, turn. Now if you're mirroring my movements, the natural thing for you to think is that you're turning to the right and then back to the center. And then still if you're mirroring, you turn into the left. It doesn't actually matter which way you turn, because you can turn both ways. And then you're facing the front and pushing out. But again, I want you to be aware of the back of your body. And do the first one. And just be aware that when you do the turning, your hips, the lower back, will be going in the opposite direction to the front of your body. So although you think you're turning to the right, half of you, your back, is turning to the left. And you can even start to really initiate the movement there. It's almost like somebody takes hold of your belt at the back and pulls you around. And it really helps to distribute the effort, the load of the movement through more of your body. It really contributes to this flowing quality that we look for. So then, one foot out, still aware of your hips and aware of the feeling of your hips being pulled back into the chair, counterbalancing the extension forwards. You'll get a gentle stretch through your back and through the back of the leg. Again, if that seems to be something that is making you move less, it's entirely possible that you were moving too far before. As your back opens out more, you will get more movement. You should find when we do it like this that it's softer in your back, and so that sense of your back extending will gradually increase. And then the change to grasping the tiger's ears, come back, push, see if you can feel that same extension through your back. Though somebody's just gently pulling you up, pulling your head up, and let the arms follow that. So there's a push from your hips are sinking back, and like the spaces between the vertebrae and your spine are just opening out a little bit, one after the other, perhaps. So again, this rising movement, this feeling through your spine. Same thing in your arms. Don't strain to throw them out from your shoulders. But get a feeling of your arm just lengthening as you come through. So grasping the tiger's ears for the first day of the year of the tiger. And then on the other side. And then changing. We develop these movements through a combination of observation, what is happening in the body, through that use of memory, recollection, internal imagery, and intent, an intention to move like that. Overall, that's why I like to use the term cultivation. And bring your feet back. So we like if you're cultivating a rose bush or something in your garden, you probably don't just go up if you want to prune it and think, well, I'll prune it and get a sort of machete and just start chopping it down. You look at it and you think, well, I want that bit to grow, pick that bit out. You look at how it's growing first, and then you get an idea, an image of how you want it to be, and then you do whatever you do, you prune it, and then maybe sort of like, you know, in a couple of weeks' time, when it starts to grow a bit, you think, well, I need to trim that bit or whatever. It's an ongoing process. And the same thing, this is why I like to use the term cultivation in the way that we develop these movements. The mind, body, the movement, reflecting on each other, impacting on each other, harmonizing with each other. So come back to the seated posture. And then once again, rubbing your hands together and tapping over. And then over your head and neck, down to one shoulder, and your arm, The other side. Part of your chest. Belly. And finally your legs. And then pushing your foot up and down, your heel up and down. And then around. On the other side. Even when you do this in your ankle, in your knee, in your hip, nice smooth movements. Though somebody will just very gently massaging the joints from the inside. And if you can get that here, then maybe you can reproduce some of that in some of the other exercises, but it's difficult, of course. So when we sit and when we've got that alignment with that image of the straight pole, we develop certain feelings, certain qualities in the body. We may notice it in our breathing or somewhere physically in the body. Just have a sense, almost a kind of intuitive sense of it in one way or another. Now standing, and as always, what we want to try and do is to reproduce standing those same qualities. So here, I'll bring the stick out again. You can see how this works. When I'm standing, ideally the weight would be just behind the ball of each foot. And so if I put the stick beside me, but in line with that, you'll see it's difficult to line myself up, so I'm trying to look at the same time. More or less, the stick comes out roughly in the crown of the head and goes down to the ankle. So I'll probably the ankle, and what I do is I go to this, and then you can see now the hip and the ankle almost in line with the hip. Oh, the stick's, but that's better there. So that's what I'm looking for in this posture. In the forward stance, the same idea. This would have to move with me, and you can see it doesn't quite reach there until I move my weight forward. And once I'm here, once again, I'm back there. So standing in the parallel stance, and when I do swaying in the river, when I'm doing this, I'm moving. Oops, quite tricky doing this, holding on to the stick string. It's there, and you can see I'm just moving a little bit to either side there. But if I go too far, now I'm going to go over. So this is your benchmark, as it were. This is your lodestone, however you care to think about it. And it isn't necessarily the case that your weight will end up behind the ball of each foot, but it should be slightly forwards. So from the parallel stance, just rolling your weight forwards and backwards. And I'm using the pole for demonstration purposes. If you do decide, you've got, say, something, had a plumb line hanging down there, I could maybe line myself up with it, but I wouldn't want to do that all the time, because you don't, mostly we don't wander around with a big stick, do we? So just using this exercise to help you find the correct sort of position. And when I was doing this with the stick, it's interesting because I'm having to hold the stick, becomes a bit trickier. So if I go forwards there and this hand goes out more, this is now pulling me over if I'm not careful. The further my hand goes, the more I get pulled away from this line. So I said in the chair, you imagine the back of your neck attached to it, but also imagine that your hands are attached to it. So as they swing forward and backward, they too can't go too far. You'd have to start straining. That's true in both directions, of course. It's harder to do going backwards. The thing that will make a difference going backwards, well, and going forwards, but here is this. So if I go back to there, I'm exaggerating. Can you see that my hips are sticking back? This is where an awareness of what's happening behind the body is useful. I'm right on the edge of falling backwards. But if I can soften my knees and my hips, that will settle me down. It's not going to work. I mean, it's still, if I'm right back here, it's not going to work. This doesn't let you escape from the laws of physics, I'm afraid. But it does help. So now this time going into rooting down, and we'll do this in a little 3-part sequence. So this is balancing the 3 Dan chins, or harmonizing 3 Dan chins, or triple heater, whichever way you choose to think about it. Changing slowly to the wild goose. So as much as possible in this stance, when we're doing exercises like this, now there isn't that forwards and backwards movement. Keep going, so going into wild goose. But here, what I don't want to do, say, as I go into the wild goose here, is I don't want to do this, or this, because then I'll start wobbling around. So gradually having a kind of fix, if you like, on where you find that point of equilibrium. Today, really, it might be slightly different tomorrow. You change. So go back into the 6. I've probably thrown you completely offline now. You probably wondered what I was doing. I just wanted to make that point. Rooting down, the wild goose, and part of the clouds. One more round. Lovely. And just shake out. 1 foot forwards. And notice the width of the step. So if I go back to this, and I'll put this on the floor now, make sure it's straight. There you go. So when I stand here, you'll see my left foot there is right alongside the pole. When I turn this foot out, I bring it in, and when I step out to that position. Long enough so that there's space between my front heel and my rear toes. Remember, so this is the laboratory. If we can build the movement here, it's not necessarily how we would normally stand, and there's all sorts of variations that we can bring into this. But here we start to really feel this sense of being able to transfer the weight accurately, maintaining that line. Remember, I showed you earlier that I'm not doing this or this. Everything starts to wobble around. When that does happen, so, and I've made this point before in terms of ordinary walking, if we were just standing around in the supermarket, we're not necessarily doing Tai Chi, and we might roll forward slightly, and you can see I've come away from that central line. But if I go too far, I'm going to fall. And the thing that's going to stop me doing that, or one of the things, is an awareness of that pull down in hips and buttocks. And so again, this awareness of what's happening in places other than sort of like the top half, front side of our body becomes really useful. Raising your toes and your heel. Aware of that center line so that you don't feel the need to do this or whatever. You don't need to do that. It's a deliberately shorter than normal step, so that we don't have to strain. If I wanted to take, say, a long step, so when I start to step in, if I wanted to really push the foot out there, I would probably lean back a little bit and then do this. That's exaggerated, of course, but I would still have that awareness of the center line, and I would still be aware of what's happening in the hip. So there's a counterbalancing movement. If you can feel that here with the slightly shorter step, but the wider step, then that awareness will begin to stay with you. And just trying to relate ideas that we work with within the Tai Chi exercises to, for an adaptation into our daily lives. Then on the other side, notice the width of your step again. Nothing wrong with stepping wide in daily life, by the way. But we don't always want to take a short step. And I've said before about gradually working to lengthen your step. But with this awareness of what's happening in hips and lower back and so on and so forth. Raising your toes and your heel. And again, do you have that quality of movement? Because if I do this, there'll be, I've lost that. And then can you drop the hips? Can you come back to that awareness of the line? So when you lose that quality of movement, there's a relatively small number of things that you would look to improve it. Stepping in. So if you suddenly feel it's a bit kind of shaky, think first about where you're placing your feet, about your hips, buttocks. Are you able to let the sort of sense of sinking down that we get right from the beginning in this class when we're laying back in the chair? Can you find that? Have you got a sense of that central line? Do all of that before you try and think of anything else. Bring the foot in and step through. Most of the variations that we find that I talked about earlier work from the hips upwards. And it might be something to do with that, but check those sort of 3 or 4 things: feet, legs, hips, and center before you do anything else. Now change direction. Remember that sense of your weight flowing through the joints, massaging the joints for you. Good. Now, 1 foot forward. We'll just do a few fisherman cast the net. Because if you check to your feet and your legs, hips, if you check the center line of the body, but you're still losing that flow somewhere, then maybe you're moving the arms too far or something like that. Maybe you've lost that connection. Just moderate the movement a little bit. And also use exercises like this so that you can be doing something, fisherman cast a net, carrying a bag of shopping, washing up, whatever, and yet at the same time developing just a little constant awareness in the back of your mind of those really fundamental principles, mostly concerned with the lower body. Good, and then on the other side. Okay. Then go back to your chair. So again, the things that we want to really hardwire into our awareness: the hips, the alignment of the body, the legs, the feet. If you think about it, that spells half. So the bottom half of the body, if you want to think of it like that. Those are things that we will always come back to. Not the only things we want to think of. And in fact, we don't really want to occupy too much of our attention on them eventually. It's good in the exercises. That's why we start off with very basic ideas. But we just want to get used to that happening, basically. So it's just there in the back of our mind. And the way that the mind and body work together means that the more you do that, the more you're going to be able to come back and find corrections being made. As soon as you sort of think of the hips, it's like, oh, the hips, the adjustment of the hips comes at the same time, more or less, as the thought. So there isn't a gap between them, and so these things gradually develop. What that means is, if you're walking along the road and you trip, your instinct is to drop your hips, not to flail around. So all of which comes with practice, of course. So again, quite a lot of technical detail in that. Feel free to email me if you want to go over it again, or you have questions about that. Quite happy for that to happen. This video will end up on YouTube soon as well, though. So if you want to go over those things, you're not going to take it all in. So coming back to embrace tiger, return to mountain, just letting things settle, letting the water drain down through the sponge. I talked about your body like a sponge with the weight draining down. Just so that whatever you picked up really settles into your awareness and into your body. So embrace tiger, return to mountain. One more round. And rest. Lovely. So thank you again. Remember, do feel free to get in contact if you want to sort of follow up any of those ideas.